I did my junior year in college in Brazil, and the only way I could really learn to speak Portuguese well was to go to the movies and see American movies or European movies subtitled in Portuguese, and that's how I kind of learned to speak Portuguese, but it's also how I learned to kind of love movies. And when I came back, I went to NYU for my final year. And while I was there, I met people who were going to make movies. It didn't occur to me that that was something that like a regular person could do. And so I started doing that. I made my first movie 4 or 5 years later with a couple of friends and $2,500. And it was called David Holtzman's Diary, and it won a lot of prizes and stuff, and it kind of introduced me to film festivals and stuff like that. It was a wonderful time. We went on struggling for a couple more years, and then finally I decided, well, I want to make movies. I got to come to LA and give it a try. And I did. And somebody told me, he said, look, you're an unknown quantity. The only way you're going to be able to get to make a film is to attach yourself to a property that's like a known thing, like a play or a novel or something like that. And I didn't have any money to do that, right? And I don't know really exactly how it came to me or when it came to me, but I thought Breathless was a film that sort of made me love movies, or it was a film that, you know, it kind of broke all the rules, and it was a big deal to me and to a lot of other people at the time. So I thought, well, it's basically a kind of an American kind of story. You know, the original film was dedicated to Monogram Pictures, and it was, you know, it was an odd attempt to make a kind of an American film. So I thought, well, okay, this is kind of a known quantity, but I told a friend of mine who happened to know Godard. He's a guy who ran the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley. And he picked up the phone and called Godard. And Godard's attitude was, sure, whatever. You know, he didn't really care. So he gave me permission to do something. And it turned out it was fairly easy to get a development deal to write a script. And Kit Carson and I sat down to write the script. And I had all these misgivings about, you know, trying to remake a masterpiece and all this kind of stuff. But as we were writing the script, we kind of figured out a different way to do it than to just copy his movie. So we took the story, but we set it, not just set it in LA, but set it in, you know, an entirely different world from his. And I decided to kind of make it more like a Hollywood movie than you know, a movie with jump cuts. We wrote a script. It was pretty well received. We were at Universal. They liked it. And so the next question was, well, who's going to be in it, right? And somebody suggested Richard Gere. And I said no. He wasn't my idea of the character at all. And we went to, well, first we went to Bob De Niro. Bob De Niro liked it. And he said, let me think about it. And he said, give me a call in about a month or something like that. And he gave me his number. And I called him in about a month. And he said, give me a call in a couple of weeks. I said, okay. couple of weeks went by, and I gave him a call. And he said, give me a call in a couple of weeks. And this literally went on for 3 or 4 months. And I kept saying I didn't know what to think. It was, it seemed like he was never going to make up his mind one way or the other. And I went to the people at Universal, and I said, can we try somebody else? They said, no. Before we do anything, you got to get a no from De Niro. So it just so happened that I had gone to film school with Marty Scorsese. So I called Marty and I said, I'm having this problem with De Niro. And he said, well, yeah, we're making this movie and he's gotten very fat and he can hardly breathe, and you're not going to get him to make up his mind anytime soon. I said, well, do me a favor, could you ask him to say no? And he said, sure. And he said no. And as soon as he said no, Universal dropped the project. I don't know how much time goes by, a couple of months go by, something like that. Gets picked up by Orion. And Orion is very enthusiastic about the script. But then there's the casting issue all over again. We went to Travolta, we went to Pacino, a couple of other people. They all liked the script. None of them wanted to have anything to do with me as the director, because to them, I was an unknown quantity. And finally, this went on for several months, and finally my agent said to me, look, you're never going to get to be the director of this film. Take the writing credit. The next time out, you'll get your chance. And I reluctantly said, okay. And they brought in another director who was very hot at the moment. He made a film called Quadrophenia. So Frank Rodham came in and cast Richard Gere. And suddenly Frank Rodham gets the green light on another project that he was developing, and I guess he felt much closer to. So he left the project. The people at Orion suggested me to Richard Gere. Richard Gere said no. So they went, then he gave them a list of directors that he would work with. And they went through the whole list, and finally, and Michael Mann was the one that said, okay, I'd like to do it. Michael Mann came on and completely rewrote the script. And then suddenly the same thing happens with him. He gets another project of his gets greenlit. And he leaves Breathless to do that film. And so now they have a script, they have a star, they have a schedule, they have a start date, they have to finish it by a certain date because Richard is committed to another movie after that. So they suggest me again. And Richard says, no way. Because I knew Marty Scorsese, I also knew Paul Schrader. And Paul Schrader had done a film called American Gigolo with Richard. And I called Paul and I said, here's the situation. Could you just ask him if he would meet me? And he said, sure. And he called him up and he agreed to meet me. I flew to New York. I met with him. He was very cagey. I didn't convince him, but we agreed to meet again the next day. I didn't know the right words to say, and he wasn't hearing the right words from me. And in between that meeting and the third meeting, I was browsing in a bookstore, and I found a book of pictures of Jerry Lee Lewis in performance. Jerry Lee Lewis is Richard's character's his hero. Jerry Lee Lewis, he was an outrageous kind of performer, and also he dressed outrageously. So I showed Richard these pictures of Jerry Lee Lewis, and something just clicked in his mind, and he suddenly realized, oh, now I get the idea what this guy is up to. And he said, okay. And from that point on, everything was great.
Enright and me were just reminiscing. Remember when you turned in your buddy, Johnny Goddard?
I had made a deal with Godard, an option, that if the film gets made, he gets, I think it was $25,000. It wasn't a lot of money. But that option had expired years before we actually got to make the movie. And so when we were in pre-production, they have to go, Orion has to go and make a deal with him, I guess. And I think the first thing they found out was that he had sold the rights to remake Breathless to 2 other producers besides ours. And one of them was his own producer. And he had made a film called Number 2, which was theoretically a sequel to Breathless, although it had nothing to do with it. It was just, that was his way of getting the money to make the film that he wanted to make.
I know what we need. We need the killer. The killer rock sound. Mr. Jerry Lee Lewis and his puppet piano.
In the original movie, Breathless, there's a moment where the lead character passes a movie theater, and he looks at a poster of Humphrey Bogart, and he says, "Bogey," and he kind of does some gesture that Bogart does. And so that's his hero. So I felt we needed a similar hero for our guy. And we came up with Jerry Lee Lewis. And I had actually, I don't know whether you know it, but I later did a movie about Jerry Lee Lewis, a biography called Great Balls of Fire. But I had actually been peddling the idea of doing a movie about Jerry Lee Lewis before Breathless happened.
He's got to go away, never to return. Though infinity beckons, I must leave behind my very heart.
Never has there been, never will there be another such as you. If leave you must, then let us depart together.
Say no more. It cannot be. It can never be. Where soars the silver surfer, there must he soar alone.
I came from Kit Carson, who was a big comics fan. And it was his idea. It was a beautiful idea. Once the idea clicked with him, he was there 100%, and even to the point where, I have to tell you, I mean, I had never worked with a movie star before. I had never even worked with professional actors. And I went to him while we were in pre-production. I said, I really never worked with actors much. I need you to help me out. And he did. He was great, and one of the things he told me was that I've always kind of kept was that the idea that the space in front of the camera has to be sort of a private space where the actor can take a chance. And so we would always clear everybody out when we were rehearsing and blocking the scene. And it made the actors feel safe to try things. And it ended up being a terrific tool that I never would have thought of myself. And at that point, what I did as a director of actors was just tell them if I thought this was too much or too little. It was kind of that simple. So it wasn't really trying to draw a great performance out of somebody who didn't know how to do it. We talked a lot about the characters beforehand, but but the big thing for me was how do you film that, the thing that they're doing, not how do you change the thing that they're doing, but how do you make it work, I guess, visually. Richard was a star, but while we were shooting the film, An Officer and a Gentleman came out, and that made him a superstar, and it was something you could kind of see happening. You know, whenever we would be outside anywhere shooting, crowds would gather. You know, it was kind of an amazing thing. He went to a whole other level, I think, from that movie, not from my movie.
Anaheim, San Diego, Tijuana, Point South.
Didn't you have a different car in Las Vegas?
Oh yeah, that one's in a shop getting fixed. This one's just a loaner.
It was always the idea of Hollywood in Los Angeles, and I was a relative newcomer to LA, and it was like finding the locations and stuff like that. It was me getting to know the city in some way. You know, it was a travelogue.
Did you do this because I left in the middle of the night? Did I hurt your feelings? Because I didn't say goodbye? You could have cost me my degree.
We knew she had to be somebody from Europe. There was a particular girl that I kind of always had in mind when we were writing the script. She was in a couple of early Paul Verhoeven films. I think her name was Monica something. And I think that may be why we called the character Monica. By the time we were making the film, she was already really too old for the part. So, but we went to Paris and we saw a lot of actresses, young actresses. And Richard very generously read with each of them. And I think he had a good time, and I had a good time, and we picked Valerie. Bill Tepper was a neighbor of mine, and he had done a film with Jack Nicholson that he starred in, called Drive, he said. So he was a kind of an actor on the scene, but he was also a really clever guy. And all the time that I was kind of working on the script, he was making suggestions. I thought he'd be good for this role, which is not a major role in the film, but and he was indeed, and he wrote a lot of his own dialogue. And it's very good.
Are you on a TV show?
No.
On a quiz show, huh? Let's make a deal, right?
No.
Well, thanks. I'll think of it.
Yes, the great James Hong. God, you mentioned him. He was great. He had, one day we had him for one day, and he was terrific. Gary Goodrow was an actor who worked in improvisational theater. I think he's one of the original people of the committee. But anyway, I had worked with him years before on a film called Glenn and Randa, and was happy to work with him again.
Lieutenant, this person you're looking for, is he kind of a seedy Vegas boy?
Yeah, maybe.
Thinks he's cute.
Well,
Somebody like that just left.
Bingo.
accessory to murder. You know what that means.
Lisa Jane Persky. Lisa Jane Persky was an old friend who's been in practically every movie I've made. And she's a terrific actress, and I don't know what else to say about her. She's wonderful. Richard Klein is an amazing cinematographer who did so many different kinds of movies. But I guess the one that he did that sort of kind of caught my eye and made me think he'd be good for us was Body Heat. And we ended up looking at a lot of photographs and talking about production design and color schemes and stuff like that. And at some point we hit it off, and and we're able to work together pretty well. I think we wanted to make the movie a little bit over the top, kind of almost like a comic book. You know, having that kind of inspiration where everything is a little bit exaggerated and a little bit not naturalistic. Dick Silbert was another guy. He was brought in by Marty Ehrlichman, who was the producer of the film, and they were all buddies. And he said, "Would you like to have Dick Silbert?" I said, "Are you kidding me?" Sure. Yeah, and he was fantastic. I mean, he just he before and after he was a production designer, he ran Paramount for a short period of time, and he just kind of knew everything about movies, and he was full of wise guy advice all the time. A lot of which I was happy to get. We had sets. We had, yeah, and that was a thrill for me. I mean, this is probably of no interest to anybody, but I'd never worked on a set before, and I never worked with a dolly, you know, and you know, you get on a set and they put the camera on a dolly and you can do anything with it, and so that was kind of thrilling. An awful lot of the film was shot outside on the streets of LA, but interiors, like Valerie's apartment, were on a stage. Well, he was great. I mean, he was a real old timer, and basically his claim to fame was that he was Barbra Streisand's manager for 1,000 years. And he was an old-time, a really good guy. And from my point of view, he was always there when he was needed to be there, but he wasn't really there that much. You know, he kept in the background, and he was terrific. Well, it's kind of a sad story in a way, because you know, when you're cutting a film, often it helps to use music to help you cut a scene or a sequence or something like that. And so I put together a lot of this soundtrack as we're cutting the film, but it was always with the idea that there would be a composer, and we hired a guy I'm sure you've heard of called Jack Nietzsche. Jack Nietzsche was a really odd character. I wanted to hire him because he had this whole history with rock and roll, and so he wasn't what the sort of conventional movie composer. And anyway, hired him against the wishes of the head of production at Orion, who had worked with him before. But I didn't listen. And he's a great musician, but he's a very ornery guy who doesn't really want to work with anyone. And it was one of the oddest experiences. I mean, I worked with, as you know, right, with Dick Silbert and Dick Klein, so a lot of people who'd been around the pool a couple of times, you know. And Nietzsche was the same way. Those guys were a joy to work with. Nietzsche was a horror to work with. He wouldn't share anything with me. He wouldn't, even when it came to the point of recording stuff in the studio where I was present, he would record like parts of a cue on one day, and other parts of it on another day, so that you never heard the whole thing altogether. And anyway, he wrote, he wrote some beautiful stuff, but it was completely out of character with the movie. It was heavy and down and kind of, it was like super dramatic and didn't have any of the sense of fun that the movie had, or that I thought the movie had. And anyway, but we recorded it and put it to the picture and had a preview. And the preview was just kind of a disaster. And at that point, the powers that be decided, or helped me decide, or I helped them decide, that we can use a bit of Nietzsche's music, but all that other stuff would go back into the movie. We had a costume designer who was a very experienced guy and very good at his job, and had really good taste. And it was hard to convince him to dress these characters, particularly the main character, in not what you'd conventionally think of as good taste. And I used to come home every night after, while we were in pre-production and doing all this stuff, and I'd talk to my wife about it, and she'd always kind of make suggestions. And finally, I just brought her in to talk to this guy, and they ended up working together, and she ended up basically having a big influence on the look of the clothes. The ending that exists now was not the original ending. And we shot it a couple of times. We had an ending that was much more like the ending of the original Breathless, with him getting shot and lying on the ground, and she's looking down at him. And it just didn't work. And it was a long process of kind of, we didn't know it didn't work until we started previewing the film. So then once we decided, well, we're going to have to shoot a new version of the ending, we had to get everybody back together again. Valerie from Paris and Richard from New York and this and that and the other thing. And it was really Richard and Kit and me sitting together, just trying to figure out what can we do to make this work. That we came up with the ending that exists now, that I think is just terrific and did work. I don't know what I expected, but I can tell you, the day it opened, I went with Mike Medavoy, the head of production at Orion, to the first screening at a theater in Century City. And he went up to the box office and he just asked the person what happened with the first show. And they gave him a number, and his shoulders sagged. He just knew from that, one showing of the film in the afternoon at one theater in LA told him everything he needed to know about what was going to happen with the film going forward. And it wasn't good enough. And that's kind of, it turned out to be true. The film got reviews that were outraged that somebody would try to remake a masterpiece, and others that thought it was a pretty good movie. But it didn't have it didn't do that well. Did okay, but it was the interesting thing to me was that it did really well in Europe, and particularly in France. It was a big hit there. I'm sorry, but this is totally news to me. I have no awareness of this. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who like the film, and I like the film, and I'm very happy that other people like the film. But I never had the idea that it was some kind of a cult hit.